And he had his laptop there with like 15 terminal screens, all running Claude code at the same time, all doing different things. Whereas you've still got plenty of people who are still handwriting code like they have forever. So that makes it really hard to try and work out like what does the software engineer tomorrow actually need to know to be a good engineer?
Hi, and welcome to HangarDX. This is a podcast about developer experience and how engineering teams solve productivity challenges. I'm your host, Ankit, and co founder of Aviator. At Aviator, we build developer productivity tools, including runbooks for AI multiplayer coding, as well as MergeQ and StackPR tools. Today, my guest is Annie, joining from Westpac, New Zealand. And Annie's written some interesting thoughts about developer productivity and developer experience and future of engineering. So we're going to be diving into some of those things. I will also link some of those blog posts in our show notes so people can also read a little bit about it. But before we get started, please introduce yourself for the audience.
Thank you, Ankit, and thank you so much for having me on your podcast. You've had some amazing other guests, so I'm really privileged to be here. As you said, I'm Annie. I'm a distinguished engineer at Westpac, New Zealand, where I've been for almost 5 years now. But I've moved around the world an awful lot, and I've worked at a whole heap of different companies. And this is actually the first time I work for a big, large, sort of heavily regulated industry. My previous experience has mostly been in scale-ups and startups. But I'm also doing a Master's of Engineering, looking at the impact of AI on software engineering. And I kicked that off at the beginning of 2024. I get to do it over 2 years as I'm doing it part-time. And I think that's given me a lot of really interesting material to discuss with you today and, more inspiring thoughts for later.
Amazing. So one of the topics we're going to dive into is your blog post on identity crisis for software engineering. And I have this blog post also open in front of me. But why don't you give me a little bit of background of how this blog post even came in the being? Like, kind of like, what were you thinking about? Like, how did this sort of originate?
I think it all probably started when ChatGPT came out in 2022, right? And the very first thing that we all started trying to do with it is to get it to generate code, because as developers, and I still call myself just a software engineer that's moved up through different types of roles, engineer, manager, pendulum, all of that. But at my core, I'm still a software engineer. And I thought, okay, this is a defining moment. This might change things a lot for software engineers, right, around the world. For me, it was actually a little bit almost personal. I got my first computer when I was 6 years old. It was a Commodore 64, and I taught myself how to program on it then at that age. And I think I knew right from that point on that I was going to be a software engineer, a programmer. I didn't know those words. Maybe, they didn't exist in my vocabulary, but I knew I was going to work with computers. I loved making the computer do something, right? Like I could turn my thoughts into something on the screen. It was incredible. So when I saw this technology come along and it was actually, pretty good at writing code, and it's only going to get better. That's the worst it'll ever be at any point in time, right? So, okay, this is going to change things for us. And I love trying to understand where things might go so I can help people prepare themselves and, maybe start to think about the new shape of the role and therefore the new skills you might need to be starting to think about and practice. It wasn't too long before I thought, okay, maybe there's a master's in this somewhere. I've been promising myself to do a master's ever since I graduated with my undergrad Bachelor of Computer Science, like 23 years ago, a very long time ago. And this was the right topic for it, right? And the more I found out about, like, I play with the tools myself. We are doing some pilots at work as well. But really through my master's, I've been able to reach out to hundreds of engineers, and I've connected with a lot of other thought leaders, people you've had on your podcast before, like Patrick Dubois. And we've talked about how this is actually impacting people. And I think it goes deeper than just another little evolution or just a new tool, right? I think it starts to really challenge what it means to be a software engineer. And I guess all of these thoughts at some point just came together into this blog post that actually, to be honest, I've kept a blog one way or another for many, many years. And this is the only one that's ever really gotten any traction. It's had about 63,000 views. And most of my blog posts don't come anywhere
Amazing.
near that, right? And I've had dozens of people reach out to me to tell me how it made them feel, that to thank me for having written it, because I was able to put into words things that they'd been feeling. And it was at that point I thought, okay, I'm onto something here. It is deeper. I don't know, maybe software engineers don't like to talk about their feelings all that much, but if someone else does, then, they'll thank them for it. So it's been a really interesting time and reception of that particular blog post.
Very amazing. So, thank you for sharing some of your background as well. And I also read on one of the posts that you describe yourself as a reluctant manager. You kind of like moved towards management at some point, and you've also done a little bit of back and forth. You mentioned that also in
Yeah.
your post a little bit. Can you walk us through what was like the first swing felt like when you left sort of like hands-on coding?
Yeah. So the interesting thing about that is, like I said, I loved the idea of writing code, right? Like actually solving problems. It's like a puzzle. I loved puzzles as a kid as well, right? But it, people pay me to solve puzzles. Like this is amazing. So that's what I wanted to do day to day. And it was only a handful of years into my career when I first started getting the hints of, hey, you've got some pretty good people like skills, softer skills. Maybe you should consider moving into management. And honestly, I should have taken it better, but I think I sort of took it as like, are you telling me my hard skills aren't that good? I'm better at the softer stuff. That's like almost offensive. So I pushed it away for 10 years, all up. I thought there's no way I can lead a team of software engineers, me being one of them. I can say we generally have pretty strong opinions on things. We like to argue about things. We want things done our way, and I thought I can't lead a team of pretty opinionated engineers without having done some of the hard yards myself. So no, I'm not ready for this. So I pushed it away, pushed it away. But eventually I got into like this sort of senior lead software engineer role. It was the highest I was going to be able to get at the company that I was at the time without moving into a different type of role. And I wasn't really finding the work that challenging anymore. I'd had some pretty really good opportunities to prove myself. And I probably was mostly proving myself to me that I could do it. And I had some really great wins. And after that, I kind of felt like most of the challenges I had were just versions of the ones I'd had before. So I could have switched companies again, but I moved around a fair bit. So I was like, oh, I've only been here for a couple of years. Maybe I will try something different then and move into management. It was tough. It was tough. One, because suddenly, in my case, I became the manager of my colleagues, right? These were people I had been in the same team with for a couple of years, and now suddenly I'm their manager. You're shifting that relationship. Yeah. So that was tough to get used to. But also, giving feedback is not the easiest thing in the world. It's not just how you deliver it; it's how the other person accepts it, right, or doesn't. The fight or flight or freeze concept that exists heavily, right? Um, Also, to give good feedback, I discovered through a lot of research, because of course I wanted to try and be the best manager I could. So someone dove into reading all the books, and you have to have had at least three like positive experiences with somebody before, apparently this is what the research says, before they'll actually take that feedback from you. And that makes a lot of sense, right? If you're like getting feedback from someone who you don't trust or have never really spoken to before, why are you going to listen to them? So there was a lot of that: hiring, shaping the team, doing performance reviews. Dear Lord, like that's a tough one. No one wants to. It is my hypothesis that most people really don't actually want to hear even the constructive criticisms and feedback, right? Deep down inside, I'm sure they know that it's good for them, and that they'll get better. And, everyone's different. So there would be people who thrive a bit more on that. But for a lot of people, it just feels like, I didn't want to hear that. So it's not an easy job. Humans are pretty complicated. They're emotional. They'll say they're going to do something, then they don't do it. So it's learning a whole different. I think it's a different type of job. It's not. I thought maybe if I can manage a software system, maybe I can manage people. It's a whole different job, and you have to learn a whole bunch of new skills. And over time, I came to love it in some ways, right? Like there were things about it that were great. Seeing people grow, seeing them achieve something that they didn't believe they could, seeing the team come together and deliver something complex and then celebrate it. These were great things, but I could only ever do management for like 2 to 3 years before I was like, oh, I'm really itching to get my hands back on the keyboard, actually build something myself. So that's hence the Engineer-Manager Pendulum that I think Charity Majors first came up with that term. Bless her, because it's a great concept, and I encourage everyone that is in the same position to take the leap of faith. You don't need to stick with any one role forever. Swing back and forth.
Amazing. I mean, we just actually did a session with charity majors this morning, so this is
Yeah.
very fresh. Okay. Sort of like just double clicking a little bit on this. Sounds like at least you took up management as sort of like a new discipline, a new challenge where you have to learn new skills. But there's also a lot of like engineers who never want to do that, right? I mean, in some ways, you also
Yeah.
kind of like, reluctantly did this. So why do you think like engineers have a visceral attachment to writing code versus, the management side of things? Because it does come up with also challenges, problems to solve, which are like showed on the softer skill side. Why is coding? I mean, like for what it's worth, I'm also a software engineer, so inherently, I also always
Yep.
enjoy being in front of the computer writing code. Like that's sort of my safe space and like place where I enjoy. But also as a founder, I've got to spend
Both
very little
sides.
time actually doing that. Why are our brains wired this way?
Gosh, I guess there is all sorts of people in the world, right? And that's what makes the world such a diverse and fascinating and beautifully complex place. The way that I have thought about this in the past, and it's what works for me in terms of explaining it to myself, is for whatever reason, the way my brain's wired up, I said already, I love puzzles, I love solving things, but I like modeling them in my head. Like, I guess in my mind, when I see a problem, or I'm described like I've got the situation, and it's primarily, I need to build a website, or we want to automate this process, or there's a bottleneck in the performance somewhere around here. I visualize that system in my head. I love systems thinking in general, but when it comes to like this type of system, it's really quite straightforward to visualize it, and then you can start visualizing like the abstractions and how you would model it all together to form a system that works, not just the one component but the whole thing, right? And then to be able to literally turn that into something that works is like magic. I'm not a builder in the sense of I can't build something out of wood. I don't. I've always said I don't have a creative bone in my body. I don't do art, but I am creative in the sense of I pour my creativity into this not tangible, very intangible thing that ends up being functional software. That for me is my outlet. It's creative as well as scientific. There's best practice that's rooted in very well thought through engineering principles, and that's what brings it its rigor. But within those boundaries, it can be really creative. And no two people will build a system in exactly the same way. That's why we end up in so many arguments about monoliths versus microservices, or distributed systems versus this asynchrony thing over here, or no, actually, in this case, you should use this tech. And we love to pour our creativity into it, and kind of our style, right? So it mixes both the engineering structural side of things, not in a physical sense, but like intangible, with that element of creativity and art. And yeah, for me, that's I'm creating something, and there's a beauty to that. Humans, like I said, are so much more complicated. My lord, like they'll tell you, yeah, I'll definitely do this thing by tomorrow, and then you talk to them tomorrow and they didn't do it, and you're like, but we talked about it yesterday. And they're like, oh, I thought you meant something else. I'm like, what do you mean? I I don't know that I could have been any clearer. And so there's a lot of self-reflection on like, how could I have been clearer? And the funny thing is that now interacting with AI, it's kind of the same thing, right? I don't know about you, but I certainly feel like there have been times when I'm like, I think I told you already not to do that. Why do you keep making the same mistake? Please do better. It's like, this feels like I'm managing a really eager intern who just isn't getting it, and keeps forgetting what we spoke about just yesterday because it doesn't have that memory. Yeah, so this is where I guess a lot of not just the beauty and the love that I have for programming and creating software, but this transition to now we are just maybe becoming managers of agents. A lot of software engineers who have become a software engineer because they love that sense of creating the thing themselves may not love the idea of suddenly not stepping it up in terms of another level of abstraction, much the same way as you would ask a team to please go and build this thing, let them think of how they're going to do it, let them pour their own creativity into it. We're kind of doing the same with agents now. It's like, can you please build me this thing? Oh, who knows how you built it? I wouldn't have done it that way, but I guess it works. Vibe code your way out to production and we're all good. Yeah, it's an interesting time.
Definitely. So, which also brings to, software engineering role itself is changing, or rather, it's evolving. I remember, so
Yeah.
one of the things you also mentioned in your post is, oh, we gave away some of the broader aspects of software engineering, requirements, design, testing to specialists, and now we kind of with AI, it's forcing us to kind of take some of those things back, right? So, is it? Do you think it's kind of we gave it away as um, like was it wrong for us to ever give it away and we should have not
Mm.
really done so, or is it really just an evolution of engineering because of changing demand in the market?
Oh, I've thought about this an awful lot too. So the genesis of this particular thought is when I did my computer science and maths degree here in New Zealand. I started in the year 2000, and at the time there was still, at least at that university, even though it was a computer science degree, not a software engineering degree, which I know other universities were starting to come up with. They taught us how to do the full end to end software development process, from learning how to talk to customers about the problem that they had and steering them away from describing the solution. Because of course, when people set out to solve a problem, most humans will probably already have some idea of how they expect it to be solved. But if you don't have that technical background, then you might not be thinking as broadly or as specifically as you might need to for your particular case, right? So leave that up to the people who are there to help you solve the problem, et cetera, et cetera. So right from requirement solicitation through the design process, like I remember having to write a big design doc because in the early 2000s we were still a little bit, waterfally, even in our education. Um, and then building the thing, coming up with the test plans, doing the testing, and getting it out to production. The whole lot, right? So I left university believing that I would be doing an element of all of those things. And perhaps because I had worked primarily at smaller companies for a large part of my career, I got that. I got to experience literally going out to the customer's workplace, maybe with a salesperson or a product person or something, and together we would interview the customer and understand really the root of the problem they were trying to solve. And sometimes we could solve the problem without writing any software at all, which was also quite an eye opener. Just a change of process, or literally move this box over here and then you're not going to trip up over it anymore. You don't need software for that. Like there
Right.
were other solutions. um, but throughout the years, it's been a while since then. Of course, we've seen a huge increase in demand for software development, which has meant a big increase in never enough supply of software engineers to fill that demand. And I think what's probably happened is because there haven't been enough people to do the bit that only software engineers seem to know how to do, which is write the code, we have tried to fill some of those other roles with people who had slightly different skill sets, right? So you don't need to know how to write code to be a product owner or product manager. Um, I've worked with some architects who never wrote code. They went straight into architecture somehow. And to be honest, I'm not really sure how that works, but hey, good for them if they think they figured it out, right? And then we've got people who have dedicated themselves to testing. And so we've really split this thing out. And suddenly, to build a piece of software, it's like you need this really big group of people to come together, collaborate, and each do their little part. It becomes like a relay almost. Like this person does that part. They hand it off to the next person. They hand it off to the next person. Poor software engineer just gets to write the code, literally has no idea who the customer even is anymore. They don't get to talk to the customer. There's this filter through which all of those requirements get delivered. They're not testing their own work because we allow them not to. I've had many discussions sometimes pretty animated, around you need to learn how to test your own stuff, because even writing your own unit tests, which, to be fair, I didn't learn how to do at university. We didn't do unit testing back then. I'm that old, right? Um, but once I learnt the value of writing unit tests, the sense of like safety that it gives you in making changes to your software, being able to be the person who deploys it to production and sees it break in ways that you hadn't imagined, teaches you so much about how not to design it next time, right? How to do it better next time. So being involved in all of those steps gives you real superpower on how to look at a software system as an entire system. But because of that increase in demand, not enough supply, the market's done what it needed to do. And suddenly, many of the software engineers that I interact with more recently seem to have almost pigeonholed themselves or been pigeonholed into, you get to write the code. You get a ticket in Jira, which is almost pseudocode at this point, and you just literally add the column to the database and expose the property through some API, and you don't know why. Like, who's going to use that? What's its purpose in life? And that worries me, because in this age of AI, where AI is really very good at writing code, maybe not so good at designing the system yet, or even testing the system and validating that the code it's written is good. These are the new problems that we're finding ourselves as software engineers maybe spending a bit more time on, writing the specs up front and giving it to the agents in a way that they understand, and context engineering our way through all of that, and verifying and validating that the code is, it's actually doing what it's supposed to do. These are now becoming things we're talking about a bit more, which is hilarious, because it's suddenly we're remembering all the things that we were always supposed to have done anyway as software engineers and as teams, working together, that maybe we weren't putting as much effort into. Those things would have helped us build better software even as human only teams, but AI is certainly convincing some, maybe let's say managers, that having a good set of unit tests is pretty damn valuable now, and knowing how to write good requirements and good specifications maybe does help a lot as well, even to your humans.
Wow, a lot of those things hit home for sure. Like, I mean, such a profound point around we as developers have gone to a point where sometimes you don't even know the implications of the work you're doing.
Yeah.
And I think certainly with AI, I love the aspect that now everyone really focuses more on the impact, the business requirement, the really understanding the need of the user. So hopefully this actually like brings us closer to the users and actually does help us become wholesome engineers, right? In a way.
Wholesome, yeah, and entire. And to that end, I think in one of the blog posts I wrote about this, so I get passionate about these things and then I pour it into a blog post, um, was that I started hearing this term product engineer a fair
Mhm.
bit. And it was precisely describing what we've just been talking about, that engineer who understands the customer and keeps the customer's needs as in the forefront of their design and thinking of the problem, and who knows how to, roll it out to production. And like, why are we relabeling what we are now trying to remind ourselves was software engineering all along? Because, of course, as soon as we started to see that maybe because of AI, the end of programming or the end of software engineering was coming along. I'm sure you saw some of those posts, floating around, people discussing that. And it was really sad to see a lot of people deciding that they wouldn't choose software engineering as a career path anymore
Right.
because maybe it just wasn't viable anymore. But the response to those comments from some of the bigger voices in our industry was, well, hang on, no, software engineering has never just been about the code, it's been about all these other things. But then I would say, then why were we all happy to entertain introducing a new title that described what we're saying actually is software engineering? Isn't that really then just a software engineer? And to that end, I've just in the last week seen that LinkedIn have introduced a new associate product builder program. They're
Okay.
kicking it off early next year, so they've just closed applications for the first cohort. And this is going to be their first foray into a whole new type of team that is, you're not just a software engineer, you're not just a product person, you are a product builder. And it's this new world where you're going to be an AI first team that builds products. And so they have an associate program for this. Like, so we're really now rethinking what it means to build software and renaming it again. You're not even a product engineer now, you are a product builder.
Interesting. I'll check it out. I have not heard of this. Sounds interesting, intriguing at least.
Right?
Uh, okay, let's talk a little bit about trust. So there
Mm.
are some aspects to it. Like I think you also mentioned in some of your posts, which is like research shows that human AI collaboration often underperforms expectations. So just taking a lens of like, okay, you orchestrating AI agents versus you managing people, there are trust involved in both cases. How do you
Mm.
compare the two? How do you think about building trust with AI? And I guess like there's aspects of building trust with people as well, but we'll come back to it later. But like building trust with AI, how does how can that happen?
See, that's a fascinating question because I think at its core, if we remind ourselves that AI is just a technology, literally, it runs on software, right? Well, in your computer on hardware, um, then to build trust, really what we're saying is how do you build the system around it so that it becomes more and more trustworthy to you, right? And I think that's actually quite a personal thing as well. So, what I see quite a lot of talk about in circles where AI comes up a lot is this concept of calibrated trust. So, calibrated trust is trusting something as much as it deserves to be trusted. No more, no less. If you trust it too much, you will misuse it. I.e., you will trust it endlessly, and if it hallucinates and lies to you, you'll be like, "Oh, good, yep." Yeah. And I think we all saw what happens when you trust things too much. With, I don't know if you saw it, but like in Australia, Deloitte produced this report for the Australian federal government, charged them $440,000 for it, and a professor went through it with a fine tooth comb and found a whole bunch of hallucinated citations and quotes that never actually occurred.
Wow.
And that's been all over the media on this side of the world, and Deloitte's had to pay that money back, unfortunately. So, you know what? I'm pleased that that happened in the public eye because it helps people understand the LLMs are not perfect. They're not reading your mind. You have to sort of really check the work that it puts out, right? So that's the misuse side. But on the other hand, on the other side of the coin, if you don't trust it enough, you won't use it at all, and then you'll disuse it, right? So that calibrated trust is insinuating that we need to find like a fine balance on how much to trust it, in which scenarios, under what, you know, contexts to apply what level of trust. And I think that's more like a muscle, right? It's a muscle that you build up through using it and through developing a sort of sense of intuition, right? If I'm sure you're probably experimenting with these tools a lot in your own space as well. The more you use it, the more you start to kind of predict when it's going to just randomly make a thing up, you know, and the more you learn about how LLMs actually work and that they don't really learn from you because they don't have that long term memory, right? That the learning is just the way that you are, the chatbot you're using or the agent you're using is reusing the previous prompts in the next prompt. So it has that context. So that's not learning. That's just how we've integrated with this beautiful computerized brain thing. You know, it's um, building trust with humans is different, I think, because we've got that much longer term memory, right? Like, you know, what do people say? Trust takes years to build and seconds to break, you know? So you build trust with people over many interactions through difficult situations. So you probably build up a lot of trust with somebody that you've gone through some tough situations with, right? Because you've seen each other in high levels of stress and you know how people react under those circumstances. But yeah, that lack of sort of memory and ability to learn within the LLM itself, that's not the agent that is built around it. I think that's where we're starting to see more value now. Um, it's really very different. So, but with a lack of the right level of trust, you end up with this verification and validation misplaced sometimes. You might validate things that maybe you don't need to so much, and you might not validate the things that you should be. And this is where evals and a lot of test unit tests and integration tests and all of the different levels of testing
Sweets.
become very, very important. Perhaps even more important than remembering how to the right syntax for a React website, right? Like if you can build the right level of test suite for auto-generated code, maybe that makes you a more valuable software engineer today. Who knows? Yeah,
Interesting.
so it's all very different.
Amazing. So this kind of like also brings to maybe just double clicking a bit more on this. As a software engineer and as any software engineer who's graduating, uh, what skills would become more useful? I know you kind of like mentioned many folks think prompt engineering is going to be an important skill for the future as well. I still find that might be only still a short term skill, but I don't know. I mean, again,
Yeah.
this is just my thesis on that. But what do you think is going to be useful for software engineers to work or get better results with AI?
It's funny you mentioned the prompt engineering thing because when I came up with the topic for my masters at the beginning of 2024, I had to choose some research questions, right? Which was really tough because as a practitioner with all of this experience, like I wanted to keep a really open mind. I didn't want to try and like predict what I thought was going to happen and then try and prove that. I thought, no, I just want to see what is the potential impact on software engineering. And so one of my 4 research questions is around the importance of prompt engineering and whether it may indeed become a new core competency. Fast forward a year and a half or so, and everyone's like, we're not even talking about prompt engineering anymore. We're talking about context
Context
engineering now. And
engineering.
it's like, so my research is already like yesterday's, topic. It's like, it's moving so fast. Um, I definitely believe that we're moving into a phase of more context engineering, so a bit more broadly than just the prompt, right? The prompt was kind of the first way that we learned how to interact with these LLMs and knowing how to prompt it well and how to give it just the right amount of information. But in reality, that information, you don't want to be typing that thing out every time. You don't want to be copying and pasting it from some prompt repository. Like in practice, I just don't see many people doing that. But context engineering makes a lot of sense because, again, with an agent software that wraps it around an LLM and can sort of structure just the right amount of context to fill the context window with just the right information for it to be able to make the decisions it needs to, be it calling a tool or giving it the right rules and your standards and your linter specifications, how you do software either yourself or in your team, giving it all of that in the right way for it to then almost read your mind. That becomes I think much more important than just the prompt itself. But so I was lucky enough, maybe 3 weeks ago I was in Japan attending a seminar, a 4-day seminar with 32 other academics. And to be honest, I was really nervous about attending this because I'm just a master's student. I'm a part time master's student. These other academics were all professors, doctors. Like, I'm the odd one out here, such an imposter. Um, but it was such a great experience. And I think and I hope that they enjoyed having me there because I brought a practitioner's lens, right? Like someone who's using these tools day in, day out with my colleagues, with my peers in the industry, talking about how it's working, how it's not working, and the broad spectrum of, some people are barely using it, other people are using swarms of agents. So 2 weeks prior to this particular academic seminar I was at, I was also at the Enterprise Technology Leadership Summit in Las Vegas with people like Gene Kim and Steve Yegi, who have just released a vibe coding book. And, I was sitting right next to Steve Yegi at one point because he spoke, but, when others are speaking, he's also just in the audience. And he had his laptop there with like 15 terminal screens, all running Claude code at the same time, all doing different things. Like he's way out there doing a very different way of, building software. Whereas you've still got plenty of people who are still handwriting code like they have forever. So that makes it really hard to try and work out like what does the software engineer tomorrow actually need to know to be a good engineer, right? Well, it kind of depends. Depends on the company they're working for. It depends on who that person is and how they work personally. Um, and to that end, these academics that I spent 4 days with, they don't know either. They're not sure. They're as uncertain as the rest of us. Some of them are very concerned around what we've seen in the market, that there's been a real pullback on hiring junior engineers. So they're seeing some of their graduates just not find work. And that is very worrying to them as well, obviously. And to some end, it even makes them reflect on what is their purpose at this point. Like if they're teaching things that are not helping people get their first job, either they need to change or not be there anymore. So there was a very interesting conversation. That the topic of the day was actually the future of the IDE.
Hmm.
So what is the IDE going to turn into, or is this just a little evolution on? It's like when we introduced compilers. Like programming doesn't disappear, right? So we're still building software. And there were some people in the room, some academics who were like, "Yep, I think source code's going to remain the important artifact." Whereas there were others who saw it as very much more a revolution, and we need to start thinking about skills like knowledge management, communication skills, um, being able to break problems down into smaller problems because agents deal better with that, understanding how to prepare that for context for the LLM. There's those are quite different skills to memorizing syntax, and and we just don't even know. Like by this time next year, we might have architect agents that do a better job at designing the system than we can anyway, and agents are going to be remote desktoping into something and navigating around and um,
Figuring out
yeah,
with themselves everything.
everything. And then who's I don't know what work there is left to be done by humans. So let's not go there.
Okay, so I know we are close to time. So, Annie, maybe sort of like a forward-looking question, which is, so you published some of this work in early this year. Um, do you have any kind of like anything which has changed since then in your way of thinking about like this particular problem or this kind of like approach? Have you kind of like maybe got some feedback from folks who responded or reached out to you since that article got published that helped you kind of like change this thought, or kind of like where do you think we are headed?
I think what I've personally developed further thoughts on is I touched on it in the software engineering identity crisis blog post, but I think if you are still wanting to be pretty technical in your role in your career, then my strong advice at this point in time is to learn how to build software that uses AI. Like don't necessarily become like a data scientist that builds the LLM. Like, oh god, if you want to do that, like great. There's You need to know a lot of maths for that sort of thing. So, but if you want to continue to build systems, I think it's not like the work's disappearing, but it's changing. So we now need to understand much more about how to build like memory into systems, how to build guardrails into all of the steps in an agent, right? So that's an area that hasn't well developed yet, and nobody really has best practice on yet. So there's a big gap there for the next generation of software engineer to fill, to learn how to use. Like, I guess when I started working, like we didn't really caches weren't even really a thing. Not like Memcache was the first one that came about like a few years after I started working, right? And I had to learn how to work with caches. Yeah. So learn how to work with some of the new technology that's coming into the foreground now, and that will allow you to continue to add really technical value. I think that's important for us to think about. It's important for academics to think about as well, to better prepare the next generation of software engineer, and for anyone who's struggling to find that first job or in between roles at the moment. You know, I'm not sure that I would be spending my time becoming the best React developer at this point. I think that time may have passed now, right? That there are plenty of people who have gone through that journey and have taught themselves to be the best React developer. And now with the help of LLMs, they can be augmented even further, amplified, and they're incredible. That's kind of done. Yeah. But what's not done is building safe agents that don't have these really terrible vulnerabilities like the lethal trifecta that Simon Wilson talks about, where you've got an agent that can take in untrusted content, has access to your private information, and can send information out, which is basically calling an HTTP URL with a query string parameter and all of your private you're going to lose your data. So there's a lot of work still to be done. So there's cool new problems to solve,
Hmm.
and so much more, right? Workflows are changing. Maybe now when we write those Jira tickets that developers just take and do without really thinking about it, we need to be writing those tickets in a way that agents can understand, because in
Right.
some cases you might already be able to sort of just give it almost directly to an agent. And that's something, a muscle that us as engineers need to think about. Like, what is the right information to put in a ticket so that an agent will make most of the right choices? So some really cool new problems to solve. It's not all doom and gloom. I guess that's what I'm coming out of a bit of a, oh Lord, like this career path is dead. It's not. It really isn't. It's just changing quite a lot. There's some
And it's
cool new problems
transforming.
to solve, transforming, evolving, you know, and be open minded about where to add that value. And there's lots of opportunity. So it's like a gold rush all over again, perhaps.
Amazing. Annie, this was almost like a window into the future. Like, love this conversation. Thank you so much for
Cool.
sharing your wisdom and your learnings and your perspective with us. This was really a wonderful conversation. And thank you everyone for listening. If you're interested in developer experience or work in DevOps platform teams, you can always learn more about and join our HangarDX community. It's dx.community. We run virtual sessions and bring in amazing speakers like Annie into our podcast series as well. So thank you all. And again, thanks, Annie.
Thank you so much. This has been so much fun. Have a great day.